Hey folks, good morning. To share my screen. We are going to wait for 2 more minutes to allow people to come in, and then we officially start. And in the meantime, folks, would you like to add your names and the company in the attendee list in the agenda? Sorry, I'll be back in 1 minute. All right, let's get started. Hey folks, welcome to the Runwise and Continuity Wise and Shimps community meeting. And this meeting happens every Tuesday per 2 weeks at 9 a.m. Pacific time zone. And we have all the recordings in this YouTube link. Um, so, I want to remind you that this meeting, we have to abide by the CNCF Code of Conduct. Basically, we should be nice to everyone. And if you have any questions or comments, please use the raise hands feature, and I will keep the window open so I can see all the hands. And this meeting has started recording automatically. At the end of the meeting, I will upload the video to the YouTube channel. All right, let's see. Recurring topics. Do we have anyone wants to introduce themselves? I believe all of you are familiar faces. please add your name to the attendee list above. Thank you so much. I'll approve it. All right, moving on to the open discussion. We have two open discussion items. First one is Jorge to discuss add simplified libcontainer instance API, which is a draft PR 250 in Run-Wazi repo. And you can click this link to go to that PR if you want to take a pic. And the second item, we have Stan presenting backward compatibility issue with 0.9. All right, let's get started. Jorge, would you like to take the stage?
Yeah, let me share my screen. Okay, I need to wait until you stop sharing, I think. No, not used to sharing on
Morris, take your time.
So sorry. Okay, can you see that?
Yep, I can see it.
Yeah, so I was working like there was a comment that the libcontainer instance has a method which is build container, that it's quite involved and it's quite repetitive. In most cases, you want to do exactly the same thing. I think that the one difference is that in some shims, we do not want to forward std_err and std_in, or std_out and std_in, because that's used for internal communication. I think that happens in Slide, if I'm or Spin, one of those, or it was, or maybe it was wasn't Worker server. Sorry, it could be either of them.
Yeah, I think it was a Worker server.
Okay, thank you for that. Otherwise, all of them kind of share the same implementation. So I was tinkering with how we can simplify that interface. And what I came up with is another implementation different from the libcontainer instance. It builds on top of libcontainer instance, simplifying the API that you need to implement. And I called this trait an engine, and you have to return a name for your engine. And then you just have a method called run. And this assumes that everything is going to be running using libcontainer. So all the things like process management, signal delivery, and everything happens using libcontainer. So that's kind of standardized, and we don't have to implement any of the normal things in an instance, like how to send a signal or how to all the other methods that the instance needs. So in this case, you just have to implement name and run, and then optionally can handle that has a default implementation that probes or WebAssembly binaries. That in the future we can evolve this. I think this is using the WebAssembly probing for WebAssembly binary, like Mosaka was doing it for the current shims. Yeah, and the idea is that when you call run, you have to set up your current engine and then run the WebAssembly binary. And once that exits, you return the exit code. One of the concerns with doing this is that currently we have two ways of implementing shims. One is with the instance API, that's sandbox/instance. That was the original API. Another way of implementing them is using the libcontainer instance that takes care of some things. And if we add this, it would be even a third way of implementing shims. Like it gives you options, but at the same time, too many options can it might not be the best idea. So at the moment, this lives under libcontainer instance and then an easy namespace. I just did that while prototyping. Doesn't mean it needs to be the final decision. And one of the options that I was thinking with is that if if we decide to go with this, we could replace the libcontainer instance with this API. So this would replace the libcontainer instance, and all the functionalities that this build upon libcontainer instance would be embedded here. So one of the things that this simplifies compared to the libcontainer instance is that the libcontainer instance relies on the concept of an executor that comes from libcontainer. This basically creates an executor for you when you create an engine. This implements the instance and creates an executor for you. And the executor is what then is going to be end up calling run. Yeah, so I think the PR has been on for a while already. I think some people has had a go at reading it. So I was hoping to get some feedback. What do you think? Should we pursue something like this or not? And what do you think of namings and etc.? Yeah, Sven, sorry.
No, sorry. So I can wait until the end. All fine. First, the name engine has nothing to do with the engine getter setter construct in the other way of creating shims.
I think it doesn't. No. I think it could be named something like runtime.
All good. It's just to make it sure that it's a different thing. And one thing I really like about the executor interface from Yuki, that when we currently create an shim and have an executor, if we can expose the executor as a lib, we can import it in another project and running it with Yuki as fully fledged OCI runtime for container runtime interfaces that are not relying on this shim and only have the OCI compliant shim. So that's what I really like about the executor interface, that you can use it with Yuki as well.
Okay, so sorry. The executor, you mean as it currently stands with a libcontainer instance API?
Yeah, with the libcontainer instance, we are creating an executor, and the executor can be used in Yuki as well as executor, and then you have not only a shim but a fully implemented OCI runtime that you then can use in other software stacks as well.
Okay. Yeah, Joe?
I just want to quickly jump on. Sven mentioned engine getter. I believe that trait has been removed by PR. Jorge, you did, right?
Yeah, the trait has been removed, but the concept of the engine in the instance still remains. Don't remember if this if it's called engine because it's the same engine or not. Let me check.
Yeah, that's just a generic variable name, right? It has nothing to do with
Yeah.
this engine.
Yeah, I think it's a generic name, probably a bad name.
Yeah, so maybe we should do a renaming either the generic name or the engine trait name. Otherwise, people get confused. Another comment I have about the engine trait, would you like to go back to the engine trait? Is it's very similar to the executor trait from libcontainer, but as you may aware, in post 0.1 libcontainer, they changed the trait definition of their executor. There is no longer can handle and naming functions. Are we? What's your take on that? Do you intend to make it similar to the executor trait going forward?
So there's two options. One of the reasons that the can handle was removed is because, if I understand correctly, now there's a validation that can be done, which is more sophisticated than the can handle. It can validate that the binary exists or not. That's the verify binary basically got moved into the validate state. So is your question whether this should be the same as the executor trait?
Yeah.
That's a good question. When you implement this trait, you're not exactly implementing the executor trait from libcontainer because it adds a little bit of hand holding for you. So in this case, this is where, for instance, this standard input redirection is being taken care of by default, and you can override that, and you can. I think that's the main difference. But yeah, an option could be. That's something I probably should explore. But an option could be for you implement an executor from libcontainer, and then we can generate a shim for that.
Okay, and the third comment I have is that I personally prefer to replace the libcontainer instance with this new one. So we have two traits exposed to the users instead of three.
Okay. Thank you, Joe.
All right, let's do we have any other comments? I don't know if we have a formal process of approving an RFC, but I would just imagine if we don't have any objections in this meeting, this implicitly go to approved stage, so we can open this PR, starting review process, and eventually merging it.
Okay, I'm gonna explore your comment on trying to replace the engine trait here with using the upstream libcontainer executor.
Cool. Brian, go ahead.
I'm not exactly sure what my comment is at the moment, other than just because it's the first time I've looked at this. But it seems like, yeah, this is just another trait that is similar to the libcontainer trait, which was brought up. So I'm kind of wondering, what are we trying to abstract, I guess, is the question. And does it make sense? Okay, so as an example, you had mentioned that this was like, oh, we're assuming that you're going to be using libcontainer with this or whatever, but that's not baked into the trait. There's nothing in the trait that says libcontainer. And so that it's like, okay, well, will this trait work on Windows? Does that make sense? Just kind of trying to figure out where the trait sits in terms of
Okay.
what you're expecting people to implement with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a fair point. The trait doesn't mention libcontainer anywhere, but this trait is used to generate an implementation for an instance that then will build on top of the libcontainer instance, and that assumes that you're running libcontainer. So the way you would normally use it is this view is horrible. Sorry. The way you would normally use it is you create an instance that wraps a struct that implements your trait. And this instance is one of those EC instance from the EC. So it's not just a trait. There's also a struct that takes a generic, and that generic has to be one of your of these traits. And the implementation for that struct assumes the use of libcontainer. We could imagine in the future when we have more full-fledged Windows support that we have a similar, we use the same trait for Windows and Linux, but then the struct that takes the generic trait has a different implementation in different platforms.
Yeah, so that's kind of, I think, where I'm going towards is okay, libcontainer, basically we're saying libcontainer is insufficient for anything other than Linux. Of course, the libcontainer APIs are very Linux specific, but the trait itself is essentially what we're saying is does not work on Windows, and probably wouldn't work on anything but Linux. I don't know that for sure because I don't recall what the trait definition is, but that's what it feels like we're saying by introducing another trait that you would implement and then take that. So we're early on in the project, so that's great. So I'm happy to get stuff in and mess around with stuff. So that's great. I do want to make sure we know what it is we are trying to abstract. And
okay, so I think
hope that makes sense.
I think one of the main differences with the libcontainer instance trait is that this implements a struct because it basically has there's some data that we always keep for all the implementations that we have, and that needs to be stored in something that's not just a trait. So the pattern that I see is that every time we implement a shim, there's some things that we always put in the struct that is going to implement that trait, which is the standard input and output and the exit code. And I don't remember if there was something else. So yeah, basically the standard input and output, the exit code, and things like the root dir and the bundle path that we use throughout the implementation that's linked to libcontainer. So I guess the main difference is that by being able to hold this information inside of the API, we can simplify the external interface that we require from consumers.
James?
So I think the difference I see here is when the libcontainer trait specifically has like on Windows, I can't reuse that at all because it had this type that I can't import into the container type, and so I can't like return the build container trait. Like I just can't even do that. Here, the run and can handle and name is further abstracted away from like the libcontainer instance thing, so I could potentially use it. I haven't actually explored using it, but the underlying implementation of it wouldn't be reusable because of like line 27 there is using libcontainer instance. So just that's my take on the differences between the two. I don't have a strong opinion yet. So.
Yeah, I think that if we have an API that looks more like the engine trait here, and then this instance it has an implementation here that takes this. I don't know if this is applicable to Windows, or Windows would need a different implementation of an instance. And then like if we go to Windows, we can add another, like we have the sys folder now. We can have an instance implementation for that trait based specific for Windows and another one specific for Linux. Then import them here, and so then at the end of the day, it doesn't matter which platform you're running. The API that you have to implement is the same one, which is the engine trait or whatever name we end up using for this.
I'm going to jump on really quick. If I understand correctly, in that instance.rf file, you can literally implement the instance trait for the instance struct instead of libcontainer instance trait. Is that right?
Sorry.
If we want to run that on Windows.
Sorry, would you mind repeating?
Yeah. Would you like to go back to the instance.rf file?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so line 27, you're just implementing libcontainer instance for any engine generic types. I'm just saying we can also implement instance trait for instance struct if we want to run that on Windows.
Yes. I don't know if the content of the struct is that translates to Windows nicely or not. Maybe for Windows we need a different content for these kind of things, but I don't know for that. But so if we need different content here, we can have
conditionally compile that, right? Just like
yes.
adding a bunch of CFG attributes to hide some contents or adding more contents for different platforms. But eventually, we can't implement libcontainer instance for Windows.
Yeah, exactly. So this would also libcontainer would move inside of a sys trait, and it would be Windows specific, Linux specific, and then for Windows we would implement some other type of instance.
Gotcha.
Sven?
Go ahead.
For me, from a user perspective, it would be awesome if I could implement one trait and it runs on any platform. But for now, it's just good that it reduces boilerplate. So I'm not sure if we right now need to think of all platforms or just go with this example and reduce the boilerplate a little bit more, and then think that we can continue from there.
I think that as long as the main trait that we require people to implement is generic enough, that we're not encoding platform-dependent things, we can focus on implementing that using libcontainer, which is what we currently have. I wouldn't like to go in a path where we are blocking basically James from continuing developing, working on Windows support. I think that as long as Windows support, it's still a bunch of to-dos, macros, but still compiles and still has a way of in the future of working with this. I would like that.
I'm not blocked right now because I am just re-implementing the instance itself. And then as I've got a partial one filled out for WASI time, and when I get a little further on that, then I can figure out what I can share and what I can't share, and we can potentially do that type of thing. But right now I'm unblocked because we have some code in there that compiles and I'm not having to rebase regularly. I think that's the big one.
Okay, so then I think from the discussion, the path forward for this, replacing the libcontainer instance with this simpler interface, and I'm going to explore if we need really an engine trait, or we can use the upstream libcontainer one, or maybe we just define a trait so that we don't hard code a dependency on libcontainer, and then that same trait can be used for Windows.
We can also define a new trait and then have a very thin abstraction that implements an executor on top of that.
Yeah, that's kind of what it does now. You see that the executor for libcontainer is a very thin wrapper over the engine trait.
Yeah.
It basically forwards everything to the engine.
Jorge, I think Brian has a comment.
Yeah. Sorry, I comment on the chat.
Yeah,
Let me see how to see the chat.
see you, James.
I'll just speak it. It's fine. I was just thinking like this is a very just go and do all the things kind of a trait, and I'm just kind of it's in a lot of ways in the same vein as the libcontainer trait that we have in tree right now. Not the executor trait, the one that we added like a week ago or whatever. This might be better than what we currently have, for sure. I'm not sure. Okay. Well, first, what works, and that's great. If this works for everybody, I'm totally fine with this. Just to make that clear, I tend to think of things more in a at a interface or trait level in terms of performing smaller operations. And I think there was something in the current one where it's like build container or something like that. And it's super huge, and the same thing for everything for the most part. And I was like, well, what if we just make this get the standard IO, and then we can take that and get everything. So that's kind of my I'm not sure the word I'm looking for, sorry. Where I tend to head towards is smaller, not fewer functions, but smaller functions, things that do less, instead of, oh yeah, just go run this thing. And I think we're kind of swapping one, probably this is a good step in the right direction, because we have a trait that's taking a struct where you set stuff, and the struct is fairly generic, not in the sense of generics, but in the sense of, okay, yeah, we can just fill in this information and create an implementation that can do that. I think that works pretty well. I just tend to want to steer towards smaller trait functions, if that makes sense. And I can totally be wrong here, and that's totally fine. I'm not a Rust aficionado, and so yeah.
Yeah. So I think that in the sense of what you're saying, there's a lot of when in this API is okay. We do everything for you, and we do it the way we think it's right. For instance, the instance here is assuming that we are going to have the two executors, one for Linux containers and the other one for WebAssembly containers, and then we're going to probe, and all that functionality is hard-coded here. So if you opt into this API, you're accepting that. That's not configurable. So there's a lot of like things that are not configurable here, and we are assuming, and we're doing it for you. It's like that's the way to do it. The reason for that is basically because we are doing that on all the shims. At least all the shims in Runwasi, we are already doing that. So at least that unifies the code into one place. The other thing is that all the big complexity is on the implementation of the struct. It's not on the trait itself. And then it's the struct that consumes a trait, the one that does all the work.
Yep. I think it's pretty good. I like that. Yeah.
I think the only thing that the trait actually assumes is it gives you a default can handle that checks if props for a WebAssembly binary.
I just want to remind that we have 23 minutes left to give enough time for the next agenda item. But I have one final comment on this. From what I've sensed, Brian, is your major concern that the function wrong in the engine trait seems to be too bulky in terms of implementation. And do you suggest to break it down to smaller functions with like granularity and better names?
That tends to be where I would go. Yeah. That said, the way this is working, this could work very well too, basically. To be clear, I'm not sure. Just kind of voicing where my brain is going when I see a trait like that. I do think this is a step in the right direction in terms of replacing the one that we just added. Because I think I think this is what the one that the Linux container instance or whatever we called it, or libcontainer instance or something. I think this is kind of where that was wanting to go. And so I think it's a good change to totally replace that because it fixes the issue of having to redo the same exact implementation everywhere. So I think that's a plus.
So just for reference, this is kind of what a run method typically looks. And this basically handles, like, inside of the run method, it's almost everything is runtime dependent. Like the WASI context builder, that's a wasm time specific concept. A lot of the things are, there's the runtime context that basically abstract quite a few things that are repeated across different runtimes, like argument handling, environment variable handling, and things like that. So it takes from spec already.
Or is this run function only going to run WASM modules?
Sorry, if it
can we
what?
Okay. Is the intention of this run function to run a WASM module?
Yes.
Can we rename it to run WASM? If that makes more sense.
I guess, but one of the things is that this same interface is being used to run native modules as well in the here. Let me see. So here there's an engine for native containers, basically the one for Linux containers. It does look like this. So here, am I in the right place? Sorry. Yeah, so it looks like this. So this is implementation that runs a native container.
Gotcha.
That basically forwards to the libcontainer default executor.
Cool. All right. I think we need to move on to the next agenda item. And Jorge, if you don't mind, we can move further discussions onto the PRI stuff. And I think from the consensus that we think this RFC is useful and we can make this, we can make this an open PR.
Perfect. Sorry, I don't know how to stop the sharing.
Take your time. Oh, Jorge just left. All right, so moving on to the next open discussion item, we have Dan presenting backward compatibility issues with 0.9. And then you take the stage.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think it's a secret with the 0.9 version, especially of the spin shim. We have the problem that the old images are not working anymore. So this is from the Days Labs, the guide to create an application. I've done exactly this on my cluster with the 0.8 shims. And when I'm going to upgrade them, I have here a small container where the container D shims are included, and I copy them over to the location where my container D shims are on the node. And when I now restart my shim, my container, I get the new shim, and it fails with my favorite error message, which is fail to start containers task, other, fail to create container, fail to receive, waiting for init ready broken channel. So that's, I would say, the most generic error message we can get when the shim crashes. And yeah, that's a little bit unfortunate because a user can't really figure out what's wrong. And the main problem is that the container is not like the shim expects it. So a lot of questions. Can we do something regards backwards compatibility? Can we at least do a better error handling here so that the user gets a message they can work with? And how do we want to communicate the backward? This is a breaking change in the new version.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. So 0.9, it's actually not released yet, so you are using the top of the main branch.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's definitely an issue. Would you like to raise an issue on that repo so I can dig into this?
Yeah, sure.
And a call for action I would take is to improve the error message. We don't want to see that.
Exactly, that would be awesome. And if we release the new version, that we somehow make sure that whoever is using that gets the information that it's a breaking change. So that they need new images.
Got it. So just for your information, I'm not going to release 0.9 until I have moved the run-WASI to the newest libcontainer commits that has opt out the verified binary. So we don't have any breaking changes for the images in those famous like shims, but the Watson Worker server shims. So once that's done, I'm going to do the 0.9 release. So there should be no breaking change.
That's
what
awesome.
I'm hoping for. Yeah, so do you know how to figure out this issue? I have a guess.
Oh, it's nothing to figure out. It's just that the permission is not correct, and the entry point has no slash in the front, and that's why the image is not working.
Exactly.
So when you say that we can get the new lib container and it would resolve this behavior, then I'm totally fine. So that was
exactly.
the first question. Can we do backwards compatibility? If so, all is fine.
Yes. I am fully aware of that. David?
The other less pernicious issue is probably the logging. I think we need to up our game a little bit in log messages that we're providing. Maybe giving a little bit more insight, possibly where we can, of where things are failing, why they're failing. It's probably just an artifact of how nascent the project is, but it's definitely one of those areas where we get something to work and we're like, yes, it works. And then we're like, okay, cool. No big deal. Getting a little bit more focus on the usability and the error messages that are flowing through could be super helpful to people. Like broken channel is, we realize that this thing stopped talking to us. Okay, that's good, but we could probably do a little better.
Cool, Stan. I will let you know I actually started working on migrating to the newest lib container yesterday night. There are some breaking changes to the executor trait, so I have to re-implement some of the things. I will let you know when the PR is ready.
All good.
Yeah, one comment about that, Joe. We also found that you were also rebasing some changes on the Wasm Worker server shim just to update it to the latest version of the libraries. In those PRs, feel free to ask either Rafael or me to review them. We are super happy to check them in case we can help with anything. And also ping us if you need something from Wasm Worker server. We'll be able to spend some time on the shim and improve it.
Great. I'm very grateful.
And thank you for your work on updating that.
No problem. And thank you, Stan, for the Dapper and theme example. I haven't had a chance to check it out, but I'll do that today.
Yeah, so it's just the image. So we need to include it in the pipeline or somewhere, or to test it. I don't know if it should be tested or if it's just an example. So yeah, just let me know where to knit it into the pipeline, and we can do it.
Yeah, I'm super happy to see it works. All right. Let's see. Do we have any other comments or agenda items that want to bring on? Counting down, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.5, 1. All right, everyone. See you in 2 weeks. Probably see some of you in WasmCon Seattle. Get back to you. 10 minutes back to you. Cool. Have a good day.
Later, folks. Later,
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.